And welcome back from your holiday weekend. It was Memorial Day weekend these past few days, and I'm not sure what you did, but I hope it was something festive with family and friends, and I certainly hope you took a moment to remember the purpose and the spirit of Memorial Day. As for me, we went up to the Ronald Reagan Library. My husband's parents live up in the LA area, and so we decided to go up there, and it's something I've wanted to see for quite a long time, actually. I did not have any expectations of going other than I knew I would probably like it. I've been a fan of his for a long time. Not even necessarily the policies, but there was always something about him that I liked. And it's funny, you probably know that I don't go into politics, and on Facebook I don't do political shares. I don't comment on politics one way or the other. And in terms of voting, I usually go with my heart. What individual, what kind of man would I want making decisions? And who would I want as a dinner guest? Who do I like the most? And they don't have to be the most charismatic, the most charming, the best looking. In fact, it's probably better if they're not. But there has to be something human about them that speaks to me. That's just what I use as criteria, and you probably think that's crazy, but I think that political views and stances change, but individuals do not. Anyway, on that note, we were up, and it was a wonderful weekend, and I really enjoyed and appreciated all the hundreds of hours of video footage that they shared throughout the museum. And at one point, you've probably seen this or seen pictures of it, but his particular plane is inside a hangar there. And this is up in Simi Valley, north of LA. And it was a 707, so it was less than half the size of the 747s today. But as you're walking through, you can actually tour it. They show you the cockpit and where everybody, has their sleeping quarters and all of this. And we're in San Diego, and it kind of reminded me of parts of the Midway, which we have anchored permanently as a museum downtown by Seaport Village. Well, as we're going through, at the end, the tour guide, there was a gentleman talking about, there's a big chocolate cake there. It's a big piece of cake. Not a big piece of cake, an entire chocolate cake. And he was telling us that there are 2 galleys on that aircraft, and that Reagan's policy was that regardless, everyone was to eat the same thing. He didn't want preferential treatment, and it wasn't a Democratic or Republican thing. Just as a man and as a human being, he felt that everybody should have the same thing when they come through. And the reason for the chocolate cake is not only was he a great fan of chocolate cake, it was his favorite dessert. Mine too, I really like chocolate. So they're another reason for me to like him. But anyway, the reason for that is because he felt as though, since the plane held 42 people, press and, different, politicians and all of this, that regardless of when they flew or where they were going, chances are someone was celebrating something, a birthday, an anniversary, the birth of a baby, any great number of things. And he always wanted to be ready for his guests. He viewed the people aboard his aircraft as his guests, and he was the host instead of the other way around. And I really love that quality about him. And as you're going through the museum, there are rooms dedicated to each facet and each period of his history, when he was governor and when he was in G Theater and Bedtime for Bonzo and all of this kind of thing. Never mind, and if you're too young to ask what the hell that is, then never mind, you won't get it anyway. But so you're you're careening through this great museum, and then there is the section of the Berlin Wall, tearing down of the wall, and there were quotes from him, and he was talking about how he felt as though, even though he had heard and he had read and they had surmised that Gorbachev was a hardliner and that this was a no-go, was non-negotiable, relations with them. He felt as though if he could get alone in a room man to man, they could communicate, just person to person. And I thought, wow, how refreshing is that, and how walls would be torn down for us if we could just look beyond what we've heard or what we perceive and go with the idea, with the presumption that if we can just be in another room, person to person, what wonderful progress we can make just as people. And it called to mind a story that I read years ago. This book came out, I think, in the 80s. I was working for Cellular One at the time or something. I was young. I was in my early 20s. I was a kid. I was a baby. And I'm not a big fan of history. Usually, yawn. It's just not something I've necessarily ever been drawn to. Some biographies, but not necessarily those of a political nature. But I picked up this book called Eyewitness to America. It's really good. It may be out of print, I'm not sure. But it's a 500-year eyewitness account of different people and places and things that have occurred over history. Well, there was a story in here written by Peggy Noonan, who is one of his speechwriters. And I'm sure you've heard this story before, but she was talking about the fact that, of course, there was the incident after he was shot, how the nurses came in and he was on the floor in the bathroom, and he was there cleaning up some water that had spilled. And what are you doing, Mr. President? What's wrong? Or what happened? Did you fall? It's like, no, I just didn't want to leave a mess for anybody when they came in. And there was another story that Peggy was reciting. She was talking about how it was so frustrating for some of the staff members because they would go in his office, and while he was supposed to be preparing for a briefing or reviewing a proposal or whatever it was, that often they would go in, and during his quiet time, which he required every day, he would sit there and write letters back to people throughout the country, and he would invite them to the White House. Just invite them. They weren't heads of state. They were just, Bessie May and Joe Smith and their family. But if they would write to him, he would make a point every single day to sit there and write letters. And they said, Mr. President, we have people that do this. You have more important things to do than this. And his response was, I have nothing to do that is more important than communicating with the people who have elected me and who, to whom have put me in this position. And I love his great sense of humility. And yes, I know, things have been written about how he was a bit distant at times as a father, or people that have talked about the impact of some of his political decisions. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about him as a person, as an individual, and the way his mind worked, and just the way he approached things. And I think, regardless of his suit and his somewhat, conservative views, which I wouldn't even necessarily agree with, some in particular. Although my husband and I were talking about that this weekend, Ireland, passed the vote for the gay marriage and so forth. And I said, gosh, I love Reagan, but that would never, ever go through if he were in office today. And my husband, said, you'd be surprised. People change, and how they think about things changes based on the information they have at that time. And, thank goodness that we still continue to reflect and consider. I'm not talking just, specifically about gay marriage, but I just mean in life and in general. But the thing that never changes is people, the sense of humanity. And so that is why I've entitled today's blog, I'm not sure if I'm going to call it chocolate cake, piece of cake, or let them eat cake, but it'll be something cake related and something chocolate related. And it is a pleasure to write today's, and I wanted to just share these thoughts with you because I know I'll forget them. You know how it is, you remember something and something moves you, and it was kind of cool, and then it's gone. So that's that. I have a 9 a.m. a new workout class for body transformation, which is good because I really want to tone my arms before the summer. Anyway, have a wonderful day. And again, so this book was called, you can probably order it on Amazon. It's wonderful. So it started in the 1400s and, different stories all throughout time. And it's very interesting because it's from the perspective of someone who witnessed whatever it was that was happening. So it's not a historical document or account, but it was someone who was there and what they saw and what their perception was of what was really happening in the room. And I love that. And it's like being a third party to that history. But it's called Eyewitness to America, and it was written by David Colbert, Colbert. I think that's right. My eyes are so bad. Yep, there it is. But you should pick it up. It's definitely worth the read, and it's a very interesting book. But have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye.